So, I'm so pleased we have Anna Ifanti of CZWG Architects with us today. Anna has worked on projects which deliver award-winning community buildings. So, hi.
Hi, Anton.
Today I'm going to ask you a few questions. So, question 1. What inspired you to become an architect?
Well, that's a good one. It's been so long ago that I actually had to think long and hard about this. I think it was my first passion for archaeology, of all things. So when I first started thinking about what I want to be when I grew up, I wanted to be an archaeologist, being originally from Greece. And little by little, as I started looking into it, I discovered the beauty of buildings and how they contribute to our civilization and our history and how they are brought together. And that was really my initial inspiration to become an architect.
Thank you. So question 2. What was your favorite book that inspired you in your career?
I can't quite recall which was my first or my sort of my biggest inspiration as such, but I can remember which one made the biggest impression when I first opened it and sort of flipped through it. It was a book called SMLXL, which stands for small, medium, large, extra large, by a very special man, Rem Koolhaas, who has a very well-known architectural practice in the Netherlands called OMA, the Office for Metropolitan Architecture. And it is a book that talks about their work across various scales, small, medium, large, and extra large. And it just describes how they approach architecture and concept designs, what materials they use. And I remember that I was blown away when I first got it in my hands.
That sounds like a really good book. So,
yeah.
Question 3. What was your favorite project that you worked on?
This one is an easy one to answer. It is a library in Southwark, in the London Borough of Southwark, called Canada Water Library, which I worked on for maybe 5 years for my current practice, and which basically I picked it up when it was submitted for planning, and I led a team that delivered it all the way to completion and handover. So I saw it pretty much from the beginning of the design until the very end when we opened the doors to everybody in Southwark for it. And it's one of my most special projects, really.
So, 4. We're all spending more time at home than ever before. What is it that you love most about your home that gives you a sense of well-being?
I think what I love the most about my home is where it actually sits, and it's the location. So we're right in front of the Hertford Union Canal in East London, in front of Victoria Park in Bow. And I love it because the first thing I see when I open the windows in the morning, the blinds, it's a view to the water and the park. And it's all the natural light that this brings. And it's just amazing to be able to feel so close with nature and to not really feel like we're living in East London.
Thanks. So, question 5. We're all in like primary or secondary school. What suggestions would you give us to explore our interests in architecture?
I think what you guys have been doing with Archimaker is pretty awesome as it is. So keep on learning, playing, sketching, talking to each other like you do. Be curious, ask questions, and just go out and look at the amazing architecture that surrounds us, whether that is in a village or in London or in a bigger city than London. I know that we can't travel now because of COVID, but when the ban does lift, I would suggest try and travel as much as you can. Open up your eyes and your imagination and see different things. And I think that's the biggest inspiration, really.
Yeah. Okay, so question 6. What advice would you give us if I was in now we're going to move on to the questions from students from Archimakers. So 1, this is from Connor. When you have built a project, do you ever look at it and think how you might have made it differently?
Yes, absolutely. And this is a very, very big lesson that we learn every time we work on something, as we say, on site when we build it, because it's very different when you sketch something and you're thinking, oh, this is really cool and it will look amazing. And you might be working on it in the computer and build a beautiful model. But then when you actually try to see how the materials come together, it becomes a completely different situation. So, you start to learn about how flexible, how, the long-term wear of the materials, how they get combined together, how they respond to the weather. It's this kind of thing that you can only learn really once you start building. So it definitely informs the process of design in the next building and the building after that.
So, yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for answering all our questions. So, can you show us a little more of your favorite project?
Absolutely. I think Cheryl has organized for a little video to be shown of the project I spoke to you about earlier, Canada Water Library.
I'm going to have to share it instead now.
Okay.
The video is just loading. Yeah, okay.
We were part of a master plan team that won a competition organised by Southwark Council for the regeneration of Canada Water. And we were the architects for the library in that scheme.
Before the library was built, the site was pretty much a derelict, overgrown, grassy area. And it was a space that people used really just to go a quick cut through to the underground station.
The great thing about Southwark is that right from the start, they involved the local community, right from the master planning. And they really wanted it to be a communal place with a community performance space, as well as a cafe and kind of places to get together. But essentially, a library is actually a place to get away from the community to a place where you can discover other worlds.
We use the good old-fashioned survey forms like everyone does. There's a festival every year in the park here, which has 7,000 or 8,000 people attending, so we were able to catch a lot of people there. People wanted a bigger library with more books, longer opening hours, but also the chance to see a film, to watch a play, listen to some live music, have to take a course.
When Southwark finally wrote their required brief for the library, it was much, much bigger than the site that the master planners had allowed for it. And so we were obliged to try and make a library that sat on a sort of postage stamp size, but they needed a library that was much larger.
The small footprint meant almost like a stiletto on a lady's shoe. We had very little contact with the ground, and the ground itself is made up over the last 100 years or so it's very poor ground.
We said, why don't you just, go outwards and have library all on one level? They went, that's exactly what we want, really. Because it's easier to supervise more than anything else. It reduces staff, means they can stay open longer and so on. Has great ramifications and consequences.
To make an inverted pyramid stand up is much more difficult compared to, say, a normal pyramid which you can sit on. All of the edges that you see are made from leaning columns of steel. So what effectively happens is the columns lean and then are tied back to the core, which anchors and stops the building falling over in any direction.
There is a sort of magic to libraries, a kind of a realm of ideas. And so on our design, it's all strongly coloured ground floor and about richness and joining together and meeting. And then you go up this staircase, it gets quieter and quieter and quieter, and you go into a kind of white zone, a kind of cloud zone in the sky where you can think. and have ideas and take ideas from books and other sources. So that, to us, was a very important sort of physical manifestation of the idea of the library, not as a sort of stuffy depository, but as a place of dreaming and ideas.
I think the skin of the building is what adds the glamour and the beauty to the building. And that is bronze anodized aluminium sheets.
It's expanded aluminium, which is when you cut slots in it, pull it apart and make it ripple. And this cladding ripples really in imitation of the water below it. What happens is that the sun bounces up onto the building, so you get this ripple that you get on many buildings by water. But this one has the added sort of poetry of the fact that the building has already got ripples on it. So you've got ripples on ripples, which is a sort of very rich and delightful, makes it gorgeous.
It kind of stands out like a jewel, which I think is what Piers had intended to do right at the beginning.
This building has a real impact on the lives of local people. We've had about 250,000 visits in the first 6 months. And even something just as simple as somewhere to come and sit and study. A lot of people who live in Southwark don't have a quiet room that they can study in at home. Here there are almost 50 individual study spaces. There's free access to the internet and access to a whole range of materials that people wouldn't have elsewhere.
What I like about this library is it's so attractive that it draws kids in, which is something that we're all aiming to do, get our kids into libraries early on.
And please keep reading, and of course writing. Thank you.
This is a time when nationally libraries are closing. We don't do that in Southwark. We open great new buildings like this and there's other ones on the way.
That was a really good building.
Thank you. What did you like the most about it?
I think I liked the shape of it, and I also liked, as they said, the ripple effect on it. It looked it made it look, really cool.
Well, if you ever find your way around Canada Water, you should check it out next time. It's really nice.
Was Lucas?
Okay. So there's if anybody wants to quickly ask, I don't know, maybe one more question on the live meeting, on the live comments on YouTube, they can, I guess, because we have maybe time for one more question before we finish. Yeah, one or two.
So someone said that they like the use of space. I just saw a comment pop up. And I think what was really cool about the building, and perhaps Piers, who was the person discussing the design of the building, he is the person that designed it. And he's one of the founding members of CZWG. So he was talking about how the building sits on a very small footprint and it goes out as you go from one floor to the other. And the reason for that is because you have the water from one side, the road from the other side, and you have the line of the tube underneath, like a tunnel. So you can't really build out from that area. But the library needs a lot more space. And they wanted the library to be open plan, which means not split in different levels. So that's why we had to literally, as we went up on every single level, the plan had to be bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's why it looks like the inverted pyramids. And that's why the structural engineer who was explaining how he makes it stand, and he said that it's easier to have a pyramid that looks like that sit because it's more stable. But what we had was the complete opposite, which did this. So they had to pull out the columns that neutralized the forces of each other, and they were pulling each other so that it kept the building stable, and all the columns were tied back to one central core that made it sit where it was and not fall over into the water.
Okay, so somebody who has a question, you can ask away. But in the meantime, somebody asked another question. What was your inspiration? What was your inspiration for the building?
So I didn't design the building. I delivered it. I was the project architect and the project manager on site. But because I have discussed this a lot with the architect that did design the building, the inspiration behind it was where it sat right next to the water. So the ripples of the water was what inspired the cladding to have this expanded aluminium with a holes that looked like the ripple effect of the water. And because the client had said to us, the client being the London Borough of Southwark, they said to us that they want the building to look like a shimmering jewel. So we looked, it has to be bronze, it has to sort of create reflections, it has to look like a jewel, but not be like, an obvious thing like gold, for example. So we looked at different types of materials and how we could achieve that next to the water. And that's what it gave us the inspiration for the cladding. And the shape of it was in response to what I was describing before, the fact that we were quite restricted in where we could build. And our clients basically told us that we want to have a bigger footprint, so a bigger plan. So we went bigger as we went up, and it created that shape in the end.
Okay, so I think we have to finish it off now. But if you'd like to draw the building, you can send it to us at the email on the orange bar at the bottom of the screen.
Great.
But yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having me.